Hey guys, um, we're back again, and it's been a couple of months now. It's been longer than I obviously hoped it was going to be. Uh, those that know me personally would know that there were a lot of things, you know, like studying, finding work, then not having work, and then looking for work, and other personal stuff did sort of like limit my ability to be consistent with the content. Um, but I had a small breakthrough, and I felt like the first thing I needed to do was to get back in front of a mic and a camera and let the people know what's going on. Um, I do want to say thank you to everyone that took the time to listen to what I had to say in the first episode, because that one was just like the basic framework of what it is that I'm trying to do and what the goal is. And today, I guess, is the first like episode of me speaking about some like real content and a thought about the best way to do that given the time that we're in right now. So, as you all should know, uh, we're voting soon, just under 2 weeks. It'll be our time to put an X on the ballot and put a new political party in power. And I say new because I'm assuming that a lot of people are looking for a change. I guess that's why Mzansi coined the phrase 2024 is our 1994. Well, if I'm not mistaken, that could have been the EFF. I speak under correction. So that statement in and of itself, 2024 is our 1994, is a very significant statement if you understand the significance of what 1994 was to a lot of South Africans that are still with us today. So, after decades of systemic oppression um, under an apartheid government, it became unfeasible for the government to maintain this system, which is why it was led to end. I think a lot of people tend to think that apartheid ended because there was a change of minds. Maybe for some, but not for the people that actually wielded the power in this nation. Um, the, I guess you could say, the sanctions, the exclusion, the separateness that people put between themselves and South Africa. So foreign nations limiting their trade and things of the sort started making the system really difficult to maintain. So we had a negotiated liberation, as some call it. And in 1994, on the 10th of May, the ANC, the leading liberation movement of the time, was sworn in as the new democratically elected government. I think at the time it was over 60% that 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 voted for the ANC. And considering that most South Africans at the time cast their first vote ever in their lives in that year, saying that 2024 is our 1994 is equally significant, but I guess for different reasons. So the ANC since 1994 has been the leading political power in this country. Every 4 or 5 years, elections come in and the ANC wins. And we've had some presidents that have done some good, some bad, a whole lot of bad, and they try and balance out with a little bit of good again. But I think there have been too many instances of too much malfeasance to too great an extent for people to consider, or for a lot of people to consider, the ANC as the ideal political party to change the lives of South Africans, um, which then presents your opposition, like the DA, the EFF, Action SA, and Rise Mzansi. Those are the biggest, I guess you could say, um, opposition parties to the ANC right now. The biggest being the DA. Um, and I'm going to speak a little bit about each of the opposition parties. But let me first just start with the ANC, just a little bit. I guess most of us know a little bit about the history. I'm not going to get too deep, but I'm going to sort of lay the framework and like lay the foundation of like how they became who they were and what has been happening that has made people lose faith in them. So obviously in 1912, the ANC was formed, and they were mainly a resistance party against oppressive laws, things like the Group Areas Act and things of the sort. Um, I'm like really summarizing a whole lot of history here. You can obviously expand on that in the comments. If there's extra notes that you'd like, that you would have liked for me to say, we can obviously have a discussion in the comments. And the most, I guess you can say when it really started showing that the ANC was really about business was in the 60s. That's when things really started heating up. You had the treason trial, things of that sort. And the ANC was obviously the ANC and its members were the ones that were always at the front line. There were other political parties as well, like the PAC, which is the Pan Africanist Congress, which was led by Robert Sobukwe and many others. Um, but obviously, the ANC was the most, I guess you could say, famous of the two at the time because of leaders like Oliver Reginald Tambo, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, Walter Sisulu, etc., etc., etc. And their position and their stance was quite clear. They were fully against the system and they wanted to find ways through interaction with whoever could help them change that system. The PAC pretty much stood for the same thing, but I guess they had a lot more fervor in their belief and were a lot more determined to do whatever was necessary at that time. Fast forward to the 80s, a lot of political leaders are in prison in Robben Island. The most famous of them being Nelson Mandela. Uh, his pictures were banned. You couldn't have any memorabilia of the man, which meant very few people got to know what he looked like. Which is why when he came out, a lot of people, were crying. Yes, because political prisoners were now released from prison, but also because this is now the man. This is what he looks like now. You could see the life being taken from him as he served his sentence. Um, Another political prisoner that really had it rough, I guess you could say had it the roughest, was Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. Uh, he was in prison in Robben Island as well, but for him it was different. Um, he was in solitary confinement for many, many years. And the government of the time created a Sobukwe clause, which essentially meant that his sentence could be renewed every 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. He had a very articulate manner in which he presented his arguments against the system of oppression that was apartheid. So much so that people like him and people like Steve Bantu Biko were seen as intellectual pariahs to the state. And what that essentially meant was these people and their ideological position or disposition to our position is too much of a threat for us to allow them to what? To live, which is why both of them ended up dying. But I deviate. I'm deviating now. I want to get back to the ANC. So now Mandela's released from prison. This is the man that was part of the ANC. He's going to come back, obviously, lead the ANC. Many people in the country that were suffering under the system of apartheid felt like they owed it to people like Mandela, who really put their lives on the line to emancipate the millions and millions of citizens that lived here. So then comes the election in 94. And then from there, things start getting a little weird. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not speaking about things that are unproven and like secret club meetings and back rooms and whatever. I'm not talking about that. What I'm referring to is the way in which the ANC essentially shifted its position not through the words in its policies, but through its implementation of those policies. So we look at one of the most famous examples being triple BEE, which was then regarded as just BEE. Um, I think in principle, the BEE is one of the most progressive economic policies that could have been drawn up in this country. My, I guess you could say, concern has always been that BE has not been properly pursued. And on top of it not being properly pursued, um, the element of corruption has made it untenable because the purpose is no longer that which is pursued. It is now just profits, and it doesn't matter who's involved, which is why you get ministers that are involved in tender contracts, which should be a clear conflict of interest, but I think should be considered an act of high treason as well, because you have now corrupted the system which you wrote to benefit the people of the country, yet you decided that you are going to benefit yourself by giving yourself that very tender that you said other people should apply for. That has been happening, I mean, constantly. You get people like Edwin Sodi, for example, a tenderpreneur, who has been given contracts like the water project in Hamanskra, which ended up killing over 20 people because it wasn't, I guess you could say, fully implemented. No, but what I would say is it was completely disregarded. As soon as the money came in, the project stopped. And that's happened too many times on too many occasions. And the people that always end up being victims of these things are the people that had nothing to do with the corruption in the first place. So all those things considered, you get things like load shedding. Um, I have a different opinion on load shedding to most people. A lot of people think that load shedding is the result of just mismanagement. You are correct, but I don't think that says everything. I think, load shedding is obviously man-made, and the reason why I say that is because we have to look at things from a broader perspective. You can't look at load shedding as its issue on its own. It's not independent. Reason being, you look at how there's already countermeasures to load shedding that are being presented as load shedding is happening at the same time. You look at people that are on the boards of ESCOM, for example, that are also on the boards of IPP, which is a independent power production companies. That, I mean, it's the very same people on both sides that are saying, yeah, no, let's push for this privatization of the supply of electricity, which then makes you wonder, okay, then why are they pursuing the load shedding route? And it's something that Noam Chomsky once said. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not going to say it 100% verbatim, but essentially what he said was, um, one of the main tenets of capitalism is the privatization of government resources. Um, so basically, in South Africa, what that means is you get ESCOM, which is apparently mismanaging the way that it produces its power. And the only way that we can get reliable power production and electricity in the country is if we collaborate with these private interests. Regardless of what their actual interests are, they should come in, collaborate with ESCOM, and they should then take the place of ESCOM and be the ones that provide power. Now, to most people, you would think on paper, just with that, you'd be like, yeah, no, okay, no, that sounds like a decent idea. But what you have to remember is these IPPs are companies. These are businesses that are pursuing a profit. ESCOM provides electricity to South Africans. A lot of South Africans do not have the money to pay for electricity, yet they're still provided with it. A business is not going to go out of its way to give electricity to someone that can't afford it. So, what does that mean? They're just going to be cut out of power. And then the only people they focus on are the people that are going to be paying. So things like that, like the misappropriation of funds, um, the misapplication of BEE, things like that, has what made the ANC seem like they can't be an option anymore. So with the DA, the EFF, Action SA, and Rise Mzansi, people are seeing the possibility of something different. So I did say a while ago that I was going to speak about the other opposition parties. So I'm going to start with the DA, the Democratic Alliance. I'm not going to do a history on each of them. I'm just going to speak on their positions right now and why people like them right now. Because at the end of the day, a lot of us don't know a lot about politics, and we don't need like this condensed informative session. Sometimes we just need someone that's going to say the basic stuff that we need to know, and then we'll keep it pushing on our own. So the DA is obviously the biggest opposition party to the ANC, and has been pretty much since the early 2000s. For me, the interesting thing is, even though they are the largest opposition, they've never really gone over 20% in the total, uh, I guess, percentage of voters in the country. Obviously, they get the Western Cape and they get Cape Town, because of the way that they govern that side. And I guess people are appreciative of the way that they govern over there, which is why they consistently vote for them. But a lot of people would basically say that the DA is just there to serve the purpose of being the ANC's enemy. So whatever the ANC presents, the DA will say no. They say, no, we want to do this. They say, no, you can't, and we're not going to let you, and we're going to sue you. We're going to take you to court to make sure that this thing doesn't happen. Um, I believe that the DA serves a purpose in that they do press the ANC rather hard. My one issue, though, is that they push them to that extent, but then they don't stand on business. What do I mean by that? You get people like the leader of the DA saying that an ANC DA coalition is not completely out of the cards. Now, how can you say that if you've been saying that no, you guys are so bad, the country doesn't need you? Are you then saying that no, for as long as you guys are there in a partnership, some way, somehow things are going to work? I don't really see that working as well as you think. Um, but either way, they do have the ability to get a lot of people to see their point of view, mainly because they're pro capitalism, big on free market. They want to do away with minimum wage. Um, they want the businesses to fill out minimum wage payments at their discretion, which some people think is a good thing. But if you consider the rates of exploitation that occurs in this country, you would know why that is an abominable idea, and it should it shouldn't even be something that people are allowed to do. Um, and they like to say that when they govern, like you can see the fruits, right? Their favorite example is Cape Town, where in the CBD, I mean, it's pretty, it's beautiful. It's got all this lovely architecture, these nice shops, like on the streets, from Bree to Long to Baitakan to all those streets. It is very pretty there. I mean, I lived there for a while when I was studying my undergrad at UCT. And I can say that the appeal of Cape Town from a purely aesthetic position, uh, it's big. But there's always the other part and the other side that they don't really speak on. It's the people that live around it. So if Cape Town is like here, everyone then living around that point then has a different position on the DA as opposed to the people living in the CBD. You get your townships like your Guletus, your Kailichas, your Langas, your Nyangas. You get your Hanover Parks, for example. You get IY, Imzamoyetu, that's up there, close to Hout Bay. Um, I mean, you get even informal settlements like the one in Observatory on Main Road, right next to a UCT student residence. You ask yourself, how is it possible that there are this many people spread out across so many areas that receive very little in terms of government assistance, whereas less than 30 minutes away, a different kind of neighborhood, a different kind of town can exist. Like, driving from Cape Town, from the city center, going on the N2, heading out. You can literally see how things literally just decline as you get closer and closer to the airport. And you ask yourself, how can they say that where they are, they govern if they are supposed to govern this whole area? There's no way that you can say you govern when it's just a myopic focus on one small point. That's the DA. A lot of people like them for other reasons. I guess I was listing the reasons why I don't like them. But you can figure out why you like them on your own time. It's my show after all. So the next one is the EFF. Now, the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, have only been around for what, 11 years? Yeah, because last year was their 10-year celebration. And in those 11 years, they have essentially positioned themselves as the largest political party pursuing, you know, communist slash socialist types of governance. I mean, they're very big on that, and they have a large following, which is a threat to many people in South Africa that believe that communism and socialism are terrible ideas. But I believe that the EFF is very interesting as a party because they understand what the needs of the people are and they speak directly to those needs in a manner that no other political party can articulate. So, a simple issue like land, for example, a lot of people get very tense around the topic of land. They don't necessarily know all about, the dispossession of land, how that came to be. Um, some people are able to, articulate themselves from the position of looking at the effects of the Group Areas and Native Lands Acts, how the dispossession of lands from the people and the forced removal of them into then homelands stripped them of a certain amount of wealth from this country that was then reserved for a specific group of people. The EFF's position is there must be an equitable redistribution of land without compensation, which is very, I guess you could say, blunt, but it makes it difficult for people to accept because to some it would seem as though they're saying, regardless of what you guys have done with this land, we're going to take it and give it to somebody else. Now, whatever you have here it might go under, it might not, but that's not our position. Our position is to take the land and give it back to the people. They also have the position of nationalizing um, strategic parts of the economy and mines, um, which many people fear would give the government too much power, economically speaking, and then would further subjugate the lower classes to more extreme forms of subjugation. But I believe that if done correctly, we can really see a country where a lot of wealth can be protected, meaning that it doesn't leave. Because we have mines and things like that that extract our resources and then they go overseas. But if we are the ones in control, we are the ones that extract the materials, we are the ones that set the price, we ensure that we do that which is advantageous for us. And then if they don't like it, they can kick rocks and keep it moving. Um, I believe that they have made themselves rather controversial. So I'm assuming most of you know, but for those that don't, last year at their 10-year celebration at the FNB Stadium, the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema, sang a certain song from the era of apartheid struggle, where the words were um, shoot the Boer, kill the Boer, something to that effect. I'm saying it because I'm paraphrasing. I don't know the lyrics off the top of my head. And for a lot of people, they felt like him singing that song and having a stadium full of people, almost 100,000 people singing that song so enthusiastically, was a threat to the lives of many white and Afrikaans people. So on the one side, you have people saying that no, there's no way you should have sang that song. It's completely terrible. It's wrong. It's not right. And then on the other side, you have people that are saying, well, the song is symbolic of resistance to oppression by an oppressive government. Now, where you choose to position yourself on that is completely up to you. I'm not going to present my position on either side because it'll it'll alienate me from too many people, regardless of which side I choose. But I believe that the rights of people ought to be respected. And if you are in a position where your rights are not being protected and enforced, then you have a right to fight for your rights to be protected. Um, so yeah, that's that on the EFF. They are interesting if you have political leanings towards socialism and things like that. You might want to look into them because we are not that far away from the voting, so we can't really waste any more time. If you're more on the big business, big capital, private corporations coming in and helping the government, maybe the DA works for you. So those are the big three. And then we have these extra two in Action SA and Rise Mzansi, which seem to be getting a lot of traction and also a lot of flack. So I had a conversation with someone on Twitter. And it's funny that I'm saying on Twitter because a lot of the times when you talk on Twitter, you're talking nothing but nonsense. But this person and I were having a discussion on why these other parties came to exist. So parties like Action SA and Rise Mzansi and Build One South Africa, etc., etc. And he said that, well, these parties exist merely to split the black vote because they know that the EFF is gaining a lot of traction with a lot of people. So they need to create these other parties to get the black people of different economic classes. So obviously they want the ones that like are close to towards the middle, like middle class, upper middle class. They want to take them away from the EFF and move them towards Action SA and Rise Mzansi. And then he went on further to say that these guys are all just DA leaders in different, I guess you could say, different suits now. They obviously use the leader of Action SA, Herman Mashaba, as an example, and Musi Maimane as well as another example, saying things like, yeah, these guys were from the DA, as something obviously didn't work well. They got kicked out, they started their own thing. But their political leanings and ideology are still primarily pro what the DA was pro. So these parties, whilst they may be different in name, they are not different in ideology, nor are they different in spirit. I mean, you might have the case for that because Action SA as well, they actually had a lot more staunch a belief in the removal of the minimum wage. But to take things further, they also wanted to scrap the age of retirement. Now, I don't know how many people feel about that, but I personally would be very pissed off if I'm 65 and I still have to clock in for work because the governing power in charge is saying, yeah, no, you can't retire at this age. You can't really retire at all. And their position on removing the minimum wage is pretty much similar to the DA's position in that the discretion lies with the the business in charge. I don't really like that. But I do understand why they have to do what they do and say what they say because they're not catering to everybody. They're not trying to open the ears, hearts, and minds of people that are not supporting them. So they are direct to their constituents. I guess most political parties are, but parties like the DA and Action SA specifically, they are very direct in that which they believe. Um, Rise Mzansi is a little bit different. And Rise Mzansi has been interesting for me to see. I interact with a lot of people on Twitter on almost a daily basis where they're sharing how great things are in the organization there at Rise Mzansi. I've got people that actually work for the political party. There are people that feel like this is the party that will like lead the charge for actual change in the country. And I mean, it seems, like when you meet someone, like ladies, say you meet a guy and like he's got all the green flags, like every single green flag you can think of. And then someone tells you something which is a red flag, right? But not just a mild red flag, a super red flag. What do you do? Because it's like all these green flags on this one end can be canceled out by this one big red flag. Now, why am I making this example? It's because, you know, with Rise and Zanzi, their rise was incredible. I mean, they understood what needed to be changed. They were talking about the maladministration of our government. They were talking about servicing the needs of the poor and the vulnerable. They were talking about getting people together. I mean, they were really bringing in that stronger together essence. By the way, they were saying that they need a collaboration of all South African citizens to come together and save the country, which is something that no other political party has been able to do in the same way. And then obviously them saying that they want the South Africans to be in charge of how this country will grow. And then obviously then comes the declaration of the 10 plus million rands that was donated to Rise Mzansi by a Miss Rebecca Oppenheimer. Now, if you are not clued in on the super wealthy in this country, the Ruperts, the Oppenheimers, the Herzogs are essentially the richest families in this country with various stakes and interest in various companies, various industries, etc., etc. Now, the Oppenheimers were like the big mining people. And I guess, during the era of apartheid and then the transition to a new democracy, many people felt like they still had a monopoly. Them and the other big families in this country had a monopoly on the South African economy. I mean, for example, Remgro, which is Johan Rupert's company, has its fingers in pretty much every industry that exists in this country. You get Naspers, which is, I mean, I didn't know just how much money they had, but they are big. Like they are enormous. I think they're one of the largest, if not the largest company in Africa. Um, so a lot of these people from back then that had a lot of money were then, I guess, looked at a little bit funny in the new democracy because it's like, if we're talking about economic redress, if we're talking about BEE, why is it that we still have such a large gap between them and everybody else? Not saying that they should be stripped of their wealth, but that the actual manner in which they make their money hasn't changed from 20, 30, 40 years ago, which means that the actual processes of redress and reform don't actually apply to them to the same extent they apply to anybody else, which is why they're able to make hundreds of billions of rands in earnings and revenue every year. Now, this Rebecca Oppenheimer then donates to Rise Mzansi, and many people end up saying, well, hold on now, if this lady from this family that has this wealth amassed in this way is donating to this party that's saying they want to create change, how are we sure that that's actually what's going to happen? What if these guys are just saying that to get our votes, and then once they have them, They do what most politicians do, and that's tap dance for the people that line their pockets with money. That was the one thing that I guess gave a lot of people pause. And a lot of people started saying things like, yeah, well, when it's too good to be true, it isn't. And I understand that. But for me, Rise Mzansi has got the appeal of understanding what it is that people need. The EFF presents what the problems are and their solutions. Rise Mzansi looks at what people need only, and then they say how they're going to address that need. They've got the skill of being able to bring in South Africans of different races and cultures, united on a single point and a single ideal, uh, and that is being like pro South Africa, right? And now that I've spoken so much about these political parties, I hope that I've inspired you to maybe go do some more research. And if there's some facts that you'd like to share, obviously add them in the comments. But now I'd like to shift gears a little bit, and speak about that last point that I just mentioned about being pro South Africa, because I think a lot of people think they're pro South Africa, but they aren't. So, for example, you can't say you're pro South Africa if the only time you really love your country is when you're going on holiday in the bush and you see the animals and you see the beautiful flowers and you think, oh wow, I love this country, and it stops there. You also can't call yourself pro South Africa, because the only time you are really a South African is when the Springboks are playing and you are at the stadium and the vibes are incredible. Because then after that, it's like, "Ah, I don't fuck with you people no more." A patriot is someone that is in love with their country to the point that there's nothing you can say and or do that would make them ever betray that. Another point that I want to make, you can't say, and this is my favorite one, you can't say you're pro South Africa when you are so keen to leave. Now, that point might ruffle some feathers, but I don't see how you can say you love your country madly and you want to see it do well and you want it to succeed and you want people, actual competent people, to come into power and fix things. And then you say, yeah, well, whilst you guys do that, I'm going to leave and go somewhere else. Because a lot of the times people don't realize just how good it is here. I actually had a conversation with some knowledgeable people just before I started recording, and we were discussing briefly just how good it is here. The cost of living, it can be expensive in some regard, but to get what we can get at the price that we get it in this country cannot be compared to any other country in the world. I say that again, in the fucking world. And there's a reason for that. Because even though our government is like bad to an extent, um, what they've ensured is they don't completely demolish the economy to a point where affording basic goods and necessities becomes impossible. In doing that, then they do allow people to have some spending power. Obviously, with things like inflation, the repo rate, and things of that nature, it has made it a little bit more difficult to try and find that sweet spot. But life here is incredible. And I don't think a lot of people are as pro South African as they think they are, because it's limited to when they're on holiday, when they go and see the box, or when they go overseas and they realize just how tough it is in that other country that they thought was so great. Um, and with that, then obviously I'm trying to prompt people to understand that we have a patriotic duty. We have a duty to ensure that we stand at the front of this important time in our country's history, understanding that each and every single one of us has a responsibility to ensuring that the dreams that we have for this country are realized. Yes, through our votes, but not only through that. The ways in which we interact with each other, the ways in which we help one another, the ways in which we can help local businesses, um, the way we can help with the offerings and the donations. By that, I mean, like goodwill services. I think also putting pressure on government to ensure that they provide actual adequate social services, things like um, access to adequate medical care, um, access to adequate education, water and sanitation, things of the sort. I think it takes, yes, the people in the community will obviously fight and say that we're not getting this, but I think it would be something else if someone that is not from that area go put pressure on the government to tell them to go and get their asses in gear and go help those people out. Because for as long as there is a system where the haves and the have nots are too far split, you will never have a point where the lines can sort of merge at some point. It won't happen. Um, we need to do our part to ensure that we are aware that us being South African is linked to other South Africans being South Africans as well. And by that, I mean understanding that the choices we make, be it in our votes or whatever, don't just impact us, they impact other South Africans, even the ones we don't know and the ones we haven't seen, that are in places we've never traveled to. Um, and I think also maybe this one is a little bit more of a challenge, but in being pro South African, I think you'd also have to be Afrocentric. Now, that one's a little difficult because when I say the words Afrocentric, some people might think I'm talking about Pan Africanism and it being linked to blackness. Not necessarily. I believe that for as long as you live where you live, you must be for the things that benefit the people around you, including yourself. So in Europe, the EU and stuff, they will always pursue the things that are Eurocentric because it is beneficial to the people of Europe. Because we live on the African continent, we have to do what we can to ensure that we all benefit being Afrocentric. And the reason why I'm saying that is because there are human rights abuses going on in Africa that are devastating populations of of this continent. That um, it's very difficult to look at and to read. Um, the main one being the genocide and displacement of Congolese people from their own country, uh, the exploitation of the Congolese people um, to the extent that millions of people have been killed and millions more have been displaced, meaning forcefully removed from where they're from, having to go and live in places they don't know. Um, the difficulty that comes with that is we end up not knowing what it is that the solution may be. Um, if other African countries can do that, because M23, for example, is the leading militant group that is oppressing the Congolese, which is backed to a large extent by Rwanda. Um, and the history of Rwanda is a separate issue. We're not going to discuss that here. But I believe that in being Afrocentric, we have to understand that we need to stand with the Congolese people as much as we can. So when they say things like boycott products, don't buy new cell phones, don't buy new laptops, because for as long as there is a demand for these new products, they will always be outsourced to the mines, the cobalt mines, and things like that. Which means that men, women, and children will still be forced to go and dig in holes in mines for hours in a day, most of the day, where they might not be getting access to food, where many of the women there are being sexually assaulted, where if you don't meet the quota, you can still get your limbs chopped, just like they used to during the era of colonialism in the very same country, um, and things of the sort. Now, when I bring that up, uh, the whole thing of Afrocentrism and whatnot, I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying we we should disregard the issues of people in other countries that are not in Africa. Because part of what makes South Africa what it is the kindness of our hearts in general. And you see that with how strong the support for the people of Palestine is in this country. Understanding that um, you are living in a system of apartheid that has lasted since 1948. We also had an apartheid that started in 1948. Ours managed to end. Yours is still ongoing, and it seems like it's only getting worse. Um, and I think saying that someone is pro-Palestine isn't saying that they're then anti-Jew. I think the critique of being anti-Zionist does not then mean you're being anti-Semitic. I don't think it follows. I mean, because the Semites as a people, if you're looking through genealogy and linguistics, uh, it is the people that spoke the ancient Semitic languages. So that's Hebrew, that's Arabic, that's Aramaic, and a couple others that I can't get off the top of my head right now. So the Palestinians and the the Jews of Israel would then both be Semites. So by me saying that I don't agree with the Zionist position that they are, I guess, ordained and given right to this land, I me saying I don't agree with that doesn't necessarily make me an anti-Semite. And I think it's very disingenuous on the part of many Zionists to say that the critique of Zionism is a hatred of Jews. Because what you're doing is you're doing yourself a disservice by trying to blur the lines and make it seem like Zionism and Judaism are one thing, which then in turn gets people to become anti Jew on the other end, right? So when they say things like, fuck Israel and fuck the Zionists, if you say saying fuck the Zionists means fuck the Jews, you're going to get some anti Semites that are going to say, well, then fuck the Jews then, which is not correct. And I don't think South Africans would ever cross that line because we have a history of Jewish people that did a lot in service to political freedom fighters. You have people like Joe Slovo, Ruth First, and many others that put their lives pretty much on the line because it was tough back then. They put their lives on the line because they saw an injustice being done here and they wanted to do that which they could, which they did. So, free Congo and free Palestine. Now, a lot of people might not like what I've said on the point of Palestine, right? Because they will say things like, I don't know history. I don't know the full context. And I am in some way condoning what Hamas did on October the 7th. Um, but I know that most of these kinds of points are points that lead nowhere because you will ask me about October 7th. I'll say, okay, what about the day before that? It's like, what do you mean? Like, well, it's not like things were good for the Palestinians for the last 76 years. So what about the day before that? And the day before that? And the day before that? And all the days before that? Then they'll say I'm deflecting. I'll say, okay. And then there's the point of them saying that I am anti Semitic. I'm not. I have no problem with anyone. No man, no woman. Your race doesn't matter. Your sexuality doesn't matter. Your political ideology doesn't matter. Um, but you and I will definitely come at odds if you believe that certain people aren't deserving of human rights um, based off of a single event that is a mere speck in the trauma that those people have experienced for decades. This is not me in any way, shape, or form trying to make it seem like I am all for the attacks by Hamas, but at the same time, the question must be asked, to what extent can someone allow themselves to be deprived of basic humanity before they crack? How long can you allow someone to put their foot on your neck before you fight back? But that's another conversation for another day. Um, so in being South African, I know I've off ramped and gone in different directions, but understanding that we have a duty to use our voice to speak for the people of Congo, to speak for the people of Palestine is necessary. And it may be divisive in this country because we have different views, but in the end, it will be worth it. And then, speaking of difference in views and perspectives and understandings, here's a little spanner in the works I'm going to throw out there, because now we're going into voting season, and just yesterday, or was it 2 days ago, the National Health Insurance Bill was signed, which has left many people confused and unsure, as to how this is feasible. And when I first heard it, I was like, it's only happening now. Because, I mean, this thing has been on the cards. I remember I'd get emails from, what is it, change.org, not mistaken, that would ask, like, yo, you can post your comments here, and things like that. It's been years ago. But now that it's been signed into law, a lot of people do feel like there is a bit of a problem. The main issue being that it can't be feasible for South Africans because the people that are going to be charged for this are the middle class going up, and you can't expect them to foot the bill, because the tax then is just going to be really, really high. Um, I understand that point, but the main tenet of that is the NHI will be paid for in part by tax. Now, that isn't limited to income tax. Income tax is a part of it, yes, but it is not only that. There's value added tax in the things that you buy, water, the, a pencil, a book, the camera that's being used to record me, the microphone that I'm speaking into, the clothes that I'm wearing. You pay VAT on all these things. With cigarettes and alcohol and things like that, you pay sin tax, right? With clothes that you order from Shein or whatever brand that gets shipped to this country, you pay import duties tax. All these different taxes are going to contribute to the NHI, which is a comprehensive healthcare scheme, aimed at ensuring that all South Africans have access to adequate health services. Well, that's the idea. Whether it'll actually be like that, we are yet to know. Some people are saying this NHI bill is just a last ditch attempt by the ANC to get certain people to vote for them. I believe that the NHI was something that should have been implemented many, many years ago, before there was a rot in our government. Because now, regardless of how well they can present this idea, there will always be that thought in the back of your mind that these guys can't be trusted. We can't really trust them with applying something as major as nationalizing health insurance, because we have seen with, for example, with COVID, the money that was meant for COVID relief ended up just going here, there, and everywhere. Over 300 million for the PPEs just managed to vanish. We had prominent members of the NEC in the ANC, Digital Vibes, if you remember that scandal. I'm not going to get into detail on that, but you end up seeing, like, some way, somehow, greedy politicians are always going to find their way to get greedy. So even though the NHI in principle is brilliant, because I mean, the idea that everyone should have access to adequate medical care. I mean, it's a brilliant idea. But do we trust this government to lead that charge? That's another chat for another day. Um, so that's pretty much all that I wanted to discuss for today. Uh, but before I end off and I say my goodbyes, I I wanted to spend some time with you and let you know that I have had a blast just speaking here. And it hasn't been easy, obviously, for me to like push with spending money to be here and speaking about what I'm speaking about and the nerves that come with that. But I appreciate the fact that people are celebrating me. You know, just yesterday, I got 6, 7 different messages of people saying that, ah, man, I know you're going to kill it. I'm proud of you, dude. Keep doing what you're doing and stuff like that. And it means a lot to me. Um, if you didn't like what I had to say here today, then I'm sorry. But I felt like it was something that needed to be spoken about. Um, we have a chance to really have our destiny in our hands. And will it be tough? Of course, it'll be tough. But that's a part of progress. And that is the part of growth, which is why I named the show Growing Pains in the first place. Because with growth comes pain, and you cannot have one without the other. So I'll see you guys again soon. When that is, I'm not too sure, but I'll do my best to ensure that I'm here as soon as possible. All right, then. Thanks, guys.